People assume crematorium workers grow numb to death. They think the heat, the silence, and the finality of the job eventually stop meaning anything. After 19 years standing in front of roaring furnaces, I believed that too. I believed nothing inside those steel chambers could surprise me, much less terrify me. But I was wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. Because on a freezing night in February 2023, long after the funeral homes had closed and the city outside lay buried under ice, I heard something no one should ever hear coming from inside a cremation chamber. Not metal expanding. Not the crack of burning bone. Not the mechanical groan of a retort fighting the cold. I heard my name. Not shouted. Not distorted. Whispered, thin, trembling, unmistakably human. And when I forced myself to look through the observation window, past the sheets of flame curling around the body, I saw something that still wakes me up at 2:43 a.m. every single night. A mouth moving. Not slackening from heat. Not opening from tendon collapse. Moving with purpose. Forming shapes, forming words. And then a hand rose through the flames, slow and deliberate, as if the person inside that furnace wasn't gone at all, as if they were trying to reach for me. I have worked around high-temperature machinery for over 4 decades. I've seen what fire does to human tissue. I know what's possible and what isn't. But nothing in the manuals, nothing in the training, nothing in science could prepare me for what I saw that night. This is the story I've tried to forget, and the reason I will never, ever step inside a crematorium again. I should probably tell you who I am before I go any further, because if you're going to believe any part of what happened that night, you need to understand the kind of man I used to be. My name is Harold Bennett and I'm 61 years old. For as long as I can remember, my life has revolved around machines. Furnaces, boilers, pressure systems, anything that runs hot enough to warp steel if you disrespect it. I spent 22 years as a boiler technician for John Deere before ever setting foot inside a crematorium. Back then, my world was ruled by gauges, valves, and numbers. Things either worked or they didn't. There was no mystery, no superstition, just physics, pressure, and math. When I switched careers at 42, Oakland Memorial Services hired me precisely because of that mindset. They didn't want someone emotional or easily rattled. They needed a man who understood heat, combustion, and engineering better than he understood people. And to be honest, that was fine with me. For almost 2 decades, I ran those industrial retorts the same way I ran a boiler, methodically, precisely, without hesitation. 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Controlled oxygen flow. Ceramic refractory lining. Chamber pressure tolerance. I knew every sound those machines could make. Every vibration. Every harmless pop and every dangerous one. I knew how bodies reacted to intense heat too, how tendons shrink, how joints pull tight, how gases escape. I knew what was natural and what wasn't. And that's exactly why the events of that February night tore through me the way they did. Because nothing about what I heard or saw matched the world I spent 40+ years believing in. To understand the weight of that, you need to picture the place where all of this happened. Oakland Memorial sits alone in the industrial district on the west side of Davenport. One brick building, no neighbors close enough to hear a thing, just the Mississippi wind slamming against the siding in winter. It's quiet on the day shift, but at night, it's another world entirely. A place where the hum of the ventilation system becomes the only heartbeat in the building, and where the glow of the retort room makes the halls look like they were carved out of firelight. Most people think crematoriums are chaotic, crowded, grim, filled with emotion. But they're not. They're clinical, mechanical, predictable. And I relied on that predictability. It made sense. It kept me grounded. It made the work feel clean, controlled, and contained. Even respectful. That's why, after 19 years, I believed I understood everything that could possibly happen inside a cremation chamber. I believed the dead stayed dead. I believed heat obeyed the rules of science. And I believed, truly believed, that nothing behind those steel doors could ever speak, move, or look back at me. I don't believe any of that anymore. Oakland Memorial wasn't the kind of place people noticed unless they had to. It sat off West Locust Street, tucked behind a row of auto repair shops and an abandoned feed mill, the kind of building most folks drove past without a second glance. One story. Brick facade. No signs besides a small metal plate near the entrance door that simply read Oakland Memorial Services. No windows in the retort wing. No flowers out front. Just a utilitarian box meant for work nobody wants to think about. But inside was a world I came to know better than my own living room. The building opened into a small reception area that always smelled faintly of disinfectant, even after hours. Down the right hallway sat 2 offices, a break room with a humming soda machine, and a cramped processing room full of bone pulverizers, stainless steel trays, and labeled urn boxes stacked to the ceiling. But the heart of the building, the part that never slept, was the left wing. The retort room. The moment you stepped through the reinforced double doors, the temperature shifted. Even in winter, the air carried a kind of permanent warmth that settled into your clothes and clung to your skin long after you left. The tile floor radiated faint heat from the machinery beneath. The walls shimmered with a dull sheen of soot no cleaning product could ever truly erase. And the furnaces, 2 hulking steel-beamed units known as Retort 1 and Retort 2, dominated the room like twin metal beasts. Retort 1 was the newer model, installed in 2016. Retort 2, though older, was the one everyone trusted. The workhorse, Eugene always called it, stubborn, loud, but dependable. I'd spent more hours with those machines than I had with most people in my life. I knew the rhythm of their burners the way a musician knows a favorite song. The low growl at ignition, the steady roar as they climbed past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, the echoing thump when the chamber expanded under heat. During the day, the retort room felt industrial, almost clinical. But at night, everything changed. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching long and thin across the tile floor. The ventilation system, which usually hummed quietly, took on a kind of low, breathy cadence when the building was empty, like the entire room was inhaling and exhaling in slow, heavy cycles. And the silence between those mechanical breaths? It wasn't silence at all. It was the type of quiet that sharpened your ears until every sound felt intrusive. The crackle of expanding metal, the faint ticking inside the refractory bricks, the pop of burning residue inside the chamber walls. On the night all of this happened, the air outside Oakland Memorial was punishingly cold. A cold that made metal shrink, doors stick, and the overhead garage latch ring out every time the wind hit it just right. I remember stepping out of my truck and hearing the ice crust under my boots. The wind cut through my jacket like it wasn't even there, but the moment I pushed open the retort room door, a blast of warm, furnace-heated air pushed back against me, heavy, thick, almost suffocating after the bitter freeze outside. I clocked in, hung my coat on the hook near the breaker panel, and rolled my shoulders to shake off the ache from the cold. Everything looked normal. The buildings across the street were dark. The parking lot was empty. Inside, only the red standby lights on the retort consoles glowed like 2 unblinking eyes in the dimness. People imagine crematoriums to be filled with voices, cries, echoes of grief. But Oakland was emptiest at night. No families. No staff. No visitors. Just one operator, whoever pulled the shift, and the steady hum of the machines meant to handle the dead with precision and quiet respect. I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I preferred it. There was something almost meditative about working alone in that warm, dimly lit room, checking gauges, logging temperatures, sliding the heavy steel doors open and shut. The world felt distant, muffled by brick walls and the relentless whir of ventilation fans overhead. And yet, as comforting as the routine could be, there was always a subtle tension at night. A feeling like the building itself was holding its breath. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the way the shadows flickered against the walls when the burners kicked on. Or maybe it was simply the knowledge that you were the only living person for 100 feet in any direction, and that behind each steel door lay a body transitioning from person to ash. Most nights, that reality didn't bother me. It was just part of the job. But on the night in question, February 13th, something felt off the moment I walked in. Nothing you could point to. Nothing broken or out of place. Just a sense that the air was heavier, the silence thicker, like the entire building was waiting for something. You learn to trust your gut after 19 years in a place like that. I should have trusted mine that night. But I didn't. And by the time I realized something was truly, profoundly wrong, The fourth case of the shift had already arrived at the loading bay, packed in a transport container that looked perfectly ordinary, but would change my life forever. The fourth case of the night arrived at 2:20 a.m., right when the building was at its quietest, when the retort room felt less like a workplace and more like a sealed chamber floating somewhere outside normal time. I heard the familiar rumble of the transport van through the side loading door, followed by the hollow slam of the metal latch. A few seconds later, Walter Krause, a driver I'd worked with more times than I could count, pushed the body cot inside. Walter looked tired. We all did at that hour. "Cold one tonight," he muttered, rubbing his hands together. "Cold enough to crack your bones?" I said, scribbling his arrival time in the log. We moved the container into the preparation room. He held the door open as I guided the cot through, the wheels thumping softly across the threshold. "Anything unusual with this one?" I asked, more out of habit than concern. 99% of the time the answer was no. "Elderly woman. Natural death. Family wants the urn by Thursday," Walter replied. He signed his name, gave me a polite nod, and headed back out into the freezing dark. When the door closed behind him, the building felt even more isolated than before. I unzipped the transport bag and unfolded the paperwork clipped to the interior. Name, Dorothy Mae Hutchinson. Age, 84. Cause of death, congestive heart failure. Date of death, 3 days prior. All routine. No medical devices. No pacemaker. No jewelry except a thin wedding band I would remove and label for the family. Mrs. Hutchinson was small, frail in the way many elderly women are. Wispy white hair, soft facial lines, a calm slackness in her expression. Her skin had the cool, waxy pallor of someone properly refrigerated. Nothing about her appearance was disturbing or unusual. If anything, she looked peaceful. I lifted her onto the preparation table, sliding my hands beneath her shoulders with practiced care. Even after so many years, the weight of a body still struck me sometimes, not for its heaviness but for how quiet it felt. A silence that wasn't just the absence of breath, but the absence of everything that once filled a life. I removed her wedding band, placed it in a labeled envelope, and double-checked her identification bracelet against the paperwork. Bracelet matches. Case number matches. Authorization signed. No discrepancies. I prepared the cremation container, a reinforced cardboard unit designed to burn cleanly, and gently transferred her inside. The cardboard rustled under her weight. I folded the top flaps, secured them, and pushed the container on the rolling tray toward retort 2. The moment I opened the retort door, heat spilled out like a wave, dry, oppressive, swallowing the cooler air of the room. The chamber glowed with faint residual warmth from the previous cycle, the refractory walls shining with a dull orange hue. "All right, Mrs. Hutchinson," I murmured, a small habit I'd developed years ago. A strange mix of professionalism and respect. "We'll take good care of you." I slid the container inside, locked the heavy steel door, and moved to the control panel. The startup sequence lit up in green. Target temp, 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen flow, standard. Cycle, 135 minutes. I pressed start. The burners ignited with a low, controlled thunder that vibrated through the concrete floor. The chamber temperature began its steady climb, 620 degrees Fahrenheit, 730 degrees Fahrenheit, 890 degrees Fahrenheit. Through the observation window, I watched the container begin to char. Flames licked the edges, turning the cardboard black before peeling it away entirely. Within 90 seconds, the fire had consumed most of the box and curled around Mrs. Hutchinson's dress, turning the floral fabric into a brief plume of smoke. This was the part most people never saw, the violence of heat, the way fire doesn't coat a body but attacks it, hungry and unrelenting. I watched long enough to confirm the burn pattern looked clean. Then, as always, I stepped back to begin the intake paperwork for the final case of the night. Everything up to that point had been routine, predictable, expected. But at 2:43 a.m., the moment the chamber temperature crossed 1,240 degrees Fahrenheit, I froze mid-sentence. A sound drifted across the room, soft and wavering, almost lost beneath the roar of the burners. "Harold?" My name. spoken like a breath. I lifted my head. The retort room was empty. The hallway behind me was dark. The ventilation system hummed, steady and unchanged. Harold? The second time I felt it in my spine. My skin prickled. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed that the sound had come not from behind me, not from the hallway, but from the direction of retort 2. Slowly, against every rational thought I had, I walked toward the observation window. My steps felt heavy, the heat intensifying with each foot closer to the furnace. When I reached the port, I braced my hands against the warm steel door and looked inside. And the world I'd known for 40 years simply broke. Through the flames, Mrs. Hutchinson's mouth was moving. Not falling open. Not slack from heat. Moving, with intention, with rhythm, with form. And just as the shock hit me, her right hand, skin blistering, fingers blackening, lifted off the hearth with a slowness so deliberate it made my lungs lock. Then her fingers curled inward. Into a fist. A perfect, unmistakable fist. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing in physics, biology, engineering, nothing in the world I believed in, allowed what I had just seen. But I had seen it. And the night was only beginning. For several seconds I couldn't move. My mind rejected what my eyes had just witnessed, shoving it into the same dark corner reserved for nightmares and hallucinations. My heart hammered so violently I could feel it in my throat. The furnace roared on, indifferent, as if daring me to look again. No, I whispered to myself. No, I didn't see that. I stepped back toward the observation port, slowly, like approaching a wild animal. The flames churned and twisted inside the chamber, bright enough to sting my eyes. Mrs. Hutchinson's body was still visible, but her hand, which I had seen curl into a fist, now lay motionless against the hearth. Her mouth hung slightly open but slack, lifeless, exactly how it should have been from the beginning. My pulse refused to slow. I swallowed hard, trying to force logic back into my brain. Heat does strange things. Bodies can shift. Tendons contract. It was a trick of the flames. You're tired. You've been on nights too long. I repeated each excuse like a mantra, clinging to them as if they were life preservers in the middle of a storm. Still shaking, I backed away from the furnace and grabbed my phone with hands slick from sweat. There was only one person I trusted enough to call. Eugene. He'd operated these retorts longer than I had. If anyone could talk me down, it was him. The phone rang twice before he answered, his voice groggy but alert enough. It's almost 3 a.m, Harold. What's going on? I stared at the glowing red numbers on the control panel. 1,340 degrees Fahrenheit, heat still rising. Gene, have you ever seen a body move during a cycle? I asked. My voice cracked and I hated how weak it sounded. Pause. Well, sure, he said cautiously. Sometimes you see an arm twitch or a leg shift. It's the heat. Muscles contract. Ligaments snap. You know that. No, I said. Not that. I'm talking about coordinated movement. Another pause, longer this time. What exactly did you see, Harold? My nails dug into the phone. Her mouth moved. Gene, it moved like she was speaking. And her hand came up. It curled into a fist. For a moment, Eugene said nothing. I could picture him sitting up in bed, the room around him dark, his brow furrowing like it always did when he didn't want to say something out loud. That's not possible, he said finally. You know that. The brain's gone long before any of that could happen. You're seeing things shift from heat. That's all. I heard my name, I whispered. I heard someone say, Harold. Twice. A longer silence this time, thick, heavy, uncomfortable. Go outside, Eugene said softly. Take a minute. Get some cold air. You've been working too many nights. Exhaustion does strange things to your head. I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me like warm water I desperately needed to believe in. You're right, I said, though I didn't feel it. I'll step out for a bit. Good. Finish the cycle. Then get some sleep when your shift ends. I nodded even though he couldn't see me and hung up. For a moment I considered doing exactly what he said, stepping outside into the cold, letting the winter air clear my head. But every time I glanced at the retort, my stomach tightened. The idea of walking away from it, even briefly, terrified me more than staying. If something was happening in that chamber, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But I was even more afraid of what might happen if I turned my back. I stayed where I was, halfway between the doorway and the furnace, unable to commit to either retreat or return. The retort hummed behind me, steady, mechanical, indifferent, but now every shift in the flames felt like a whisper, every crackle like a warning. I tried to keep my breathing even, but my chest rose and fell too quickly, betraying the panic clawing at my ribs. Eventually, logic, or what was left of it, forced me back to the control panel. Chamber temperature, 1480 degrees Fahrenheit. The cycle had progressed exactly as it should. Nothing on the screen suggested anything unusual. No alarms. No pressure irregularities. No oxygen fluctuations. Just the slow climb of heat toward the target range. Finish the cycle, I told myself. Do your job. Get through the night. But the longer I sat at my desk, the more I felt the room shift around me, not physically but atmospherically. Like the air had grown dense, tight, saturated with something unseen. I tried to focus on paperwork, on handwriting, on forms I'd filled out 1,000 times. But my ears kept drifting back to the furnace. The burners roared steadily, but beneath that roar, beneath the mechanical certainty, I heard something else. A rhythm. No, not a rhythm. A cadence. Something faint, almost like syllables hiding inside the fire. My palms dampened with sweat. My fingers tightened around my pen until the plastic creaked. I forced myself not to look up, not to acknowledge the sound forming behind me. But at 1520 degrees Fahrenheit, there was no denying it. Harold. My name, unmistakably clear this time, not a wisp, not a hallucination, but a voice cutting through heat that should have erased every trace of sound. My whole body went cold. Harold, it hurts. The second sentence wasn't screamed. It wasn't even loud. But it carried something far worse, intention. As if the voice wasn't trying to scare me, but tell me something. Something personal. Something pleading. I pushed back from the desk so hard the chair nearly toppled. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, just bolt out into the frozen parking lot, leave the door swinging behind me, never look back. But something stronger, curiosity, terror, disbelief, I don't know, dragged me toward the observation port. My shoes scraped the tile with each step. The heat intensified with every inch I closed between myself and the furnace. I could feel the warmth radiating through my uniform, the hair on my arms prickling from the temperature alone. When I reached the port, I hesitated. For a split second, I shut my eyes, praying that when I opened them, everything inside would be exactly as science dictated. But it wasn't. What I saw shattered whatever was left of my denial. Mrs. Hutchinson's body was no longer a body. Most of the soft tissue had burned away, leaving darkened remnants clinging to bone. Her rib cage was nearly bare, the brittle arcs of bone glowing faintly beneath the flames. And yet, she was moving. Her jaw, what remained of it, opened and closed in a rhythmic pattern. Not chaotically. Not from heat expansion. But with deliberation, like she was still forming words. I watched in frozen horror as her rib cage expanded outward, stretching the remaining connective tissue until it strained. The motion was unmistakable. Unnatural. A grotesque imitation of breathing. No, not an imitation. A reproduction. As if something inside the furnace believed it still needed air. My throat tightened. A sound, a whimper maybe, escaped before I could stop it. I gripped the door handle with both hands, fighting the urge to tear it open, even though doing so would expose me to lethal heat. I swallowed hard, stepping back, unable to tear my eyes from the movement inside. This wasn't heat contraction. This wasn't gas expansion. This wasn't science. This was intention. Purpose. Awareness. The jaw kept moving, slow, precise, agonizing to watch. The chest rose once, then fell. Then rose again. A grotesque cycle of motion repeating itself inside a chamber that should have reduced every trace of life to ash within minutes. I backed away until my legs hit the desk behind me, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The room felt like it was spinning, the furnace's glow filling the edges of my vision like wildfire. I didn't dare look again. I couldn't. Because whatever was happening inside Retort 2 was no longer a malfunction or a momentary hallucination. It was interaction. Recognition. And somehow, God help me, it was directed at me. I didn't remember walking away from the retort. One moment I was staring at that impossible rise of bone inside a chamber hot enough to liquefy metal. The next I was sitting at my desk with my hands pressed against my face, trying to steady my breathing. The roar of the burner seemed louder now, as if the furnace itself were aware of me, aware of my fear, and feeding off it. When the cycle finally completed and the flames died down into a low, exhausted flicker, I couldn't bring myself to open the chamber door right away. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Maybe more. Every nerve screamed at me to leave the building entirely, but some other part, some stubborn part, needed answers. Needed logic. Needed to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. When I finally unlocked the retort and processed the remains, everything looked normal. If anything about charred bone fragments can be called normal. No signs of motion, no strange positioning, nothing that hinted at the nightmare I'd witnessed. It was as if the flames had erased not just the body but the evidence too. That should have comforted me, but it didn't. Because flames don't erase memory. And they don't erase sound. Not the sound of someone whispering your name while burning at 1,580 degrees Fahrenheit. After I finished the remains and placed the labeled container in the holding area, I walked straight to the computer station in the office. A part of me didn't want to dig, what sane person would? But another part needed to. Needed to know if I had imagined the whole thing, if this was stress, sleep deprivation, or something that could be blamed on an overactive mind in the middle of a graveyard shift. I logged into the operator archive. Oakland Memorial kept digital records for every cremation going back over a decade. Operator notes, temperature logs, cycle data, maintenance reports. I'd never paid attention to the notes before. Why would I? 99% of them were identical. Cycle normal. No complications. Equipment functioning properly. But tonight I searched for the 1%. I typed keywords. Movement, anomaly, irregular, unexpected. At first nothing. Just endless rows of predictable reports. Then a single entry, November 2019. Operator, Evelyn Shaw. Deceased, George Kowalski 70. Note, observed unusual movement during cycle. Equipment functioning normally. My pulse quickened. I clicked again, scrolling down the next 100 entries until another appeared. August 2021. Operator Eugene Miller. Deceased, Martha Dennison 63. Note, significant movement visible through observation port mid-cycle. Likely heat-induced contraction. Cycle completed. The words likely and heat-induced sat wrong immediately, like a bandage placed over a wound too deep to hide. A third entry appeared almost a year later. April 2022. Operator, Carl Jensen. Deceased, Raymond Custer 58. Note, body shifted position multiple times. Limb movement appeared deliberate. Recommended maintenance inspection. My breathing stalled. 3 operators. 3 separate cases. 3 quiet warnings buried inside technical logs nobody ever read. The building's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as if reacting to my discovery. I leaned back in my chair, the vinyl cold against my sweat-soaked shirt. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't hallucinating. Something had been happening in Oakland Memorial long before I ever saw a jaw move or a rib cage expand. And the worst part wasn't the entries themselves. It was the fact that none of them had ever been reported, escalated, or even discussed. Every one of them had been brushed off as heat contraction, or equipment shift, and forgotten. Buried beneath routine. But people don't forget something like that. Not unless they're trying to. Not unless they're scared. At that moment, only one thought cut through the fear. Evelyn. She had quit abruptly in 2019, packed up without a goodbye, and moved to Arizona. Nobody ever understood why. They assumed burnout, family issues, anything but what it really was. I needed to talk to her. I spent a week tracking down her new number through old funeral home contacts. When she finally answered, her voice was tight, guarded. "Evelyn, this is Harold. From Oakland." Silence. Long enough for me to hear her breath catch. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to be honest." Another silence, this one heavier like she already knew. "What did you see during the Kowalski case?" Her inhale trembled. "He opened his eyes," she whispered. "The chamber was full temp. He was already burning, and he opened his eyes and looked right at me." She paused. "I quit the next morning. I couldn't do one more shift in that place." My stomach sank. "Harold," she added, voice cracking, "whatever you saw, you need to get out of there." I closed my eyes, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Because deep down I knew she was right. But something inside me, fear, curiosity, or both, wouldn't let me leave. Not yet. Evelyn's voice stayed with me long after the call ended, thin, shaken, carrying the weight of someone who had tried for years to forget what she saw. But the moment I hung up, the building around me felt different. Not haunted, no, not exactly, but aware. Like the walls themselves had been listening, like the retorts were holding their breath, waiting for my next move. I should have quit right then. Walked out, locked the door behind me, never looked back. But human fear has a strange way of twisting itself into obsession. And the more terrified I became, the more I needed proof. Proof that what I'd witnessed wasn't exhaustion. Proof that I wasn't succumbing to some late-in-life mental break. Proof that the dead had moved, and not just from the heat. So on April 3rd, exactly a month after the night with Dorothy Hutchinson, I set the stage for what I now realize was one of the worst decisions of my life. I brought in a small digital camera. Not the kind you'd notice. No tripod. No giant lens. Just a compact device with night-adjusted settings and a battery strong enough to last an entire cremation cycle. I positioned it near the observation port of Retort 2, angled low like a silent witness. If anyone walked in, they'd think it was a maintenance tool or a spare meter. Nothing suspicious. The case scheduled for that night was an 86-year-old woman named Helen Pritchard. Her file was unremarkable. Natural causes. No implants. No conditions requiring additional caution. A standard cremation. If anything unusual happened, the camera would catch it. And if nothing did, then maybe I could finally breathe again. The cycle began at 1:58 a.m. I watched the chamber glow to life, watched the cardboard container collapse into flame, watched the body become outlined through the fire, shapes turning softer, then sharper, then skeletal as the minutes passed. I kept my distance, sitting at my desk, pretending to write notes while my eyes flicked constantly toward the retort. But I didn't see anything unusual, not at first. The cycle progressed exactly as it should. 600 degrees Fahrenheit. 900 degrees Fahrenheit. 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. 1,450 degrees Fahrenheit. Helen's body reduced as expected. Flesh burned away. Bones revealed. No twitching. No shifting. No signs of life or awareness. My shoulders began to relax. For the first time in weeks, something inside me loosened. Maybe Dorothy's case truly had been some mix of exhaustion and suggestion. Maybe the heat played tricks on me that night. Maybe. Tap, tap, tap. A crisp sound, deliberate, rhythmic, cut through the roar of the flames. My body snapped upright. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Not cracking bone. Not metal stress. Not the muffled collapse of tissue. A pattern. I stood and approached the retort, heart pounding in my throat. Through the observation port I saw the source. Helen Pritchard's finger bones, thin, blackened, were tapping against the hearth. Not randomly, not spastically, but in perfect, horrifying sequence. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. A message. A signal. Or worse, an attempt at communication. I staggered backward, hitting the wall behind me. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh God, no." But I couldn't look away, because something even more impossible happened next. Her rib cage expanded. Not collapsing inward as bones do when connective tissue burns, but expanding outward as if lungs still existed beneath them. as if she was trying to breathe. My knees nearly gave out. "No," I muttered. "No, this can't, this isn't." But the nightmare wasn't finished. Her skull, which had been angled downward, began to rotate. Slowly, smoothly, purposefully. The cervical vertebrae, those tiny delicate bones that should have shattered long ago, moved with horrifying precision. The skull turned 1 degree, then 2, then 15, then 40, the jawbone glowing faintly orange in the heat. Then it stopped, facing the camera, facing me. Even though I couldn't see eyes, couldn't see anything that resembled a face, something about the angle, the position, the unnatural certainty of it made my stomach twist. It wasn't random. It wasn't accident. That skull knew something was watching, and it wanted to look back. I stumbled toward the camera, heart slamming inside me. I ripped it from its spot without thinking, nearly dropping it from the heat radiating off the steel door. My hands shook violently as I hit stop on the recording. I should have saved it. I should have kept the evidence. I should have shown someone, anyone. But terror does strange things to the mind. When I replayed the footage in the empty office minutes later, my body turned to ice. Everything I'd seen with my own eyes was there, clear, stable, undeniable. The tapping bones. The rising rib cage. The skull turning until it filled the frame. The camera didn't distort it. Didn't misread it. Didn't hallucinate it. It recorded truth. Sometimes people think fear makes you cling to proof. But the deeper the fear, the more unbearable the proof becomes. I deleted the footage. Deleted the backup. Erased every trace. Not because I thought no one would believe me, but because I realized I didn't want anyone else to see it. Some truths don't set you free. Some truths trap you. And this truth would haunt me for the rest of my life. By the time the sun clawed its way up over Davenport that morning, my nerves were so frayed I could barely turn my keys in the ignition. I sat behind the wheel of my truck for almost 10 minutes, staring at my shaking hands, replaying the footage in my mind even though I'd erased it. The tapping bones. The rising rib cage. The skull turning with impossible control. I kept telling myself I'd done the rational thing, deleting that proof, cutting it off before curiosity led me somewhere I couldn't come back from. But as I drove home, the world outside the windshield felt unreal, as if I were moving through someone else's life. People walking dogs. Cars warming up. Coffee shops opening. Everyone acting like nothing beneath the surface of life could ever ripple, let alone reach out from a burning chamber. But I knew better now. I'd seen too much. When I stepped through the front door of my house, Barbara looked up from the kitchen table. She smiled, soft, warm, unchanged. "You look exhausted," she said gently. I wanted to tell her everything, every whisper, every movement, every second of terror, but the words jammed in my throat. How could I describe something that shattered physics? How could I burden her with a truth I wished I could unlearn? "I'm fine," I lied. "Just, long night." It wasn't until I lay in bed, fully awake despite the exhaustion crushing my bones, that the decision finally settled over me. Not a sudden epiphany. Not a burst of courage. Just a quiet, heavy certainty. I couldn't go back there. Not ever again. I didn't sleep that day. Not even for a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Helen's skull pivoting toward the camera. Every time I heard a creak in the house, my heart leapt into my throat, expecting another whisper. When my shift came due again the following week, I didn't even try to pretend I could handle it. I walked straight into Robert Swenson's office, my supervisor for almost a decade, and handed him my resignation letter. My hands were still trembling as I passed it across the desk, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "I'm done, Rob. Effective immediately." He blinked behind his glasses, confused. "Harold, you've been here 19 years. Are you sure? Did something happen?" I had 1,000 answers and none I could give. I think it's time," I said. "I want to enjoy my grandkids while I've still got some good years left." Robert leaned back, studying my face. He didn't push. He didn't ask the questions I knew were forming in his mind. Maybe he saw the fear I couldn't hide. Maybe he'd seen shadows in other operators before me. He nodded slowly. "All right. If that's what you need." The retirement party came 2 days later, A small gathering with sheet cake and styrofoam cups of coffee. Everyone clapped when Eugene handed me a card signed by the staff. But when he pulled me aside, his voice dropped. "You figured out what was bothering you on those night shifts?" he asked. I forced a smile. Fatigue. Nothing more. But we both knew it was a lie. His eyes softened with something between sympathy and relief. "Yeah," he said. "Fatigue." That was the moment I realized he didn't want the truth either. Some things are easier not to know. Some things you survive only by walking away. And that's exactly what I did. Retiring didn't save me the way I hoped it would. People talk about quitting a stressful job like stepping out of a burning building into fresh air. Instant relief, instant clarity. But walking away from Oakland Memorial felt less like escaping fire and more like carrying it home with me. For the first few days, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I stacked lumber at Menards, helped customers pick out plywood, cut boards on the panel saw. Tasks so ordinary, so grounded in the living world that I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd drown out the memories simmering in the back of my mind. But they didn't drown. They resurfaced. Always at night. Always when the house was quiet. Always at 2:43 a.m. The first time it happened, I shot upright in bed so fast my back seized. My heart pounded, not from a nightmare, I hadn't dreamed at all, but from something deeper. A sense. A memory. A time stamped inside my body. 2:43 a.m. The minute Dorothy Hutchinson whispered my name. Barbara stirred beside me. "You okay?" she murmured, half asleep. "Yeah," I whispered. "Just need some water." I walked to the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and stared at my reflection in the window above the sink. I didn't look like myself. My eyes were hollow, my face pale, the lines around my mouth drawn tight. I'd escaped the building. But not the night. I told myself to stay away from West Locust Street, but old habits die hard. Driving around Davenport often meant passing within a mile or two of Oakland Memorial. Each time I changed lanes, took detours, added 10 or 15 minutes to the route rather than let my truck drift anywhere near that brick building. It wasn't fear of seeing the place again. It was fear of what I might feel. Fear that one glimpse of that familiar roofline, one flash of orange glow from the exhaust stack, would drag the memories up so violently I'd lose control right there on the road. I avoided funerals too. Whenever someone in the family passed, Barbara went alone. I couldn't bring myself to walk into a visitation room knowing where the journey ended. Not after watching bones move on their own. Not after hearing what I heard. I used to believe cremation was peaceful, a clean return to ash. Now the thought of it filled me with dread. Because I knew something no one wants to consider. People don't always leave quietly. Sometimes something lingers, conscious, aware, for a moment longer than it should. And those moments are not gentle. One night in early May, the power flickered through our entire neighborhood. Just a quick pulse. Lights dimming, TV cutting out, then snapping back on. Barbara didn't even look up from her book. But I froze. Because for that split second of darkness, I was back inside the retort room. Back in that suffocating heat. Back in the glow of flames bending around bone. Back in the instant Helen Pritchard's skull turned toward the camera. I couldn't breathe. When the lights steadied, I found myself gripping the arms of my recliner hard enough to leave indentations. My chest heaved and I could taste metal in my mouth, a sharp, tangy panic I hadn't felt since that night in April. I didn't tell Barbara. How could I explain that a half-second power surge had thrown me into the worst moment of my life? That something as harmless as a flicker felt like a warning? That sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear tapping? 3 soft taps. Pause. 3 more. The same rhythm Helen used inside the furnace. Whenever I hear it, whether it's the settling of the house, a branch brushing the siding, or the heater kicking on, I freeze. My breath catches. My heart stutters. Because once you've heard bone tap against steel at 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, you never forget the sound. Eugene and I still get coffee sometimes at a diner off Kimberly Road. We don't talk about Oakland. Not directly. But every now and then he says something like, "Night shift's been rough lately. Hard to keep good people." Or, "A new kid quit last week. Didn't say why." He always stirs his coffee slowly, eyes avoiding mine. He doesn't want me to ask questions. And I don't want to hear the answers. Some truths burn deeper than any furnace. Some truths follow you home, slip into your dreams, whisper your name at 2:43 in the morning. And some nights as I lie awake staring at the ceiling, I wonder what the new night operators are seeing, what they're hearing, when they're alone in that retort room. I hope they walk away sooner than I did. I hope they never reach the point I reached. Because once the dead speak to you even through flame, you never stop listening. People sometimes ask me now that I'm retired, whether working around death for so long changed my views on the afterlife. They expect a comforting answer, something gentle, poetic, maybe even spiritual. They want to hear that I've seen peace, that I've witnessed dignity, that the end is quieter than they fear. I can't give them that answer. A few weeks ago, a customer at Menards asked while I loaded 2X4S into his truck. His father was dying and he wanted to build the man's coffin by hand. He looked at me with hopeful eyes, waiting for wisdom. I told him the only thing I could say without lying. I believe something continues, I said. I just don't know what form it takes. He nodded like that made sense, but he didn't hear the part one didn't say, the part that claws at me every night. What I saw at Oakland wasn't peaceful. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't an easy passing into anything bright or forgiving. It was struggle. It was awareness. It was a desperate echo of a person caught between two worlds during the one moment they should have been beyond pain, beyond breath, beyond voice. That's the truth that keeps me up at 2:43 a.m. Not ghosts. Not hauntings. But the possibility that consciousness doesn't disappear instantly. That something remains, trapped inside a burning body for a flicker of time we weren't meant to witness. Something that can still move, still feel, still try to speak. I avoid the crematorium now. Even driving past the industrial district makes my skin crawl. I take longer routes, waste gas, waste time, anything to keep a few extra blocks between me and that building. Between me and the furnaces that swallowed the dead but didn't silence them. And yet, sometimes when the wind shifts just right, when the night settles too heavily, when the house goes still and Barbara sleeps beside me, I feel it. A presence. A pressure in the air. A memory rising like heat from a closed chamber. I wonder what's happening at Oakland Memorial after midnight. I wonder what the new night operators see through that narrow window. I wonder which name the dead are whispering now. And God help me. I pray it isn't mine.